Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on supporting families with a child with Autism Spectrum Disorder. My name is Louise Chaquette, and I'll be your host today. I'm with the Best Start Resource Center, and the presenter is Elizabeth Mitchell from Autism Ontario, who you can see on the screen, hopefully if all worked out well. First of all, I'd like to begin by acknowledging Indigenous people who've been living and working on the lands across Canada for thousands of years, including the land where you are now watching this webinar from today. The Health Nexus office in Toronto is located on the historical territory of the Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. So just to give you a little bit of orientation, on the screen you will notice that there are some files on the bottom left that you can download at any point. There are some web links that we encourage you to view. Some are videos, so you might want to watch them after because it might be, they don't transfer so well on this platform, so we figured it might be easier to watch them afterwards. And this webinar is being recorded, and the link will be sent to all the participants after the webinar and will be posted on our website. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Elizabeth Mitchell, who is the Family Support Coordinator for Autism Ontario. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Merci beaucoup, Louise. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this today. I also want to acknowledge the people in the background that are making this happen, because without all of you, none of us would be here today. So as Louise said, I'm having just a little technical thing right now. There we go. We have about an hour and 10 minutes, and then we're leaving 20 minutes for discussion. So here's what we're going to do today. Go through some introductions very quick, talk a little bit about who Autism Ontario is, what a family support coordinator is and what they can do, what is an autism spectrum disorder, and tips for working with those with ASD, including 10 things children with ASD wish you knew. So we have a poll for you to do today. I'm really interested in knowing what capacity you're joining us today. Are you a parent of a child with autism, a professional, or both? I am a child and youth worker who has been lucky enough to be in the field of autism spectrum disorders for over 35 years. I started my career being trained in applied behavior analysis in the old way, which was very much a reactive approach. We now take a very proactive approach to teaching children and youth and adults new skills. I was also lucky enough to spend 18 years in a school board where I got to lead one of the very first teams of autism spectrum disorder, teacher and CYW, to help kids in the school system and help staff understand what is going on. I also have been lucky enough to work in camp programs, parent relief programs, and a program for our hard-to-serve adults, which was one of the most amazing experiences and really impacted on me the importance of taking data and really understanding the function of behavior. I worked for 7 years at Geneva Centre, traveling across Ontario, training school board staff, and that was an adventure that I loved greatly. Part of that adventure took me all the way to Newfoundland. And currently now I'm in my job with Autism Ontario as a family support coordinator for Hamilton, Niagara, Halton, Norfolk, and Brant. So I see we have almost 89% of us joining us today are professionals, and 11% of us are parents. So thank you for that. If we could go to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Terrific. So I just want to quickly go through some of the mission and vision that we certainly are working towards acceptance and opportunities for all people on the autism spectrum disorder, and we really are working at ensuring quality of life. As you may have heard in the news, we're struggling more in the area of adults and making sure that adults have worthwhile jobs and living, but we certainly have made lots of changes in the 45 years that Autism Ontario has been here in Ontario. We are celebrating our 45th year, and I also want everybody online to know that we are a bilingual organization. So here we are about the family support coordinators. So there are 9 of us in the 26 regions in Ontario. We provide consultations around autism spectrum disorders, usually through phone calls or email and in person. We support parent support groups. We often will lead a parent support group, which gives families opportunity to come together and learn from each other. You'll see FSC, that means Family Support Coordinator. CEC means Community Events Coordinator. We work together to bring you workshops. So we try and bring in some renowned speakers in the area to speak with families and professionals about what's going on in the world of autism right now. We also work very closely with our CECs to make sure and build some social learning opportunities in each of your areas. Now this slide looks really good on screen, but it's going to look terrible in your PowerPoint. I do apologize. I specifically put it here because I want you to look at the regions. So you know what region you're in, and if you look to the right, you're going to see emails. This information is all available on the Autism Ontario website in a format that you will be able to read afterwards. So we like to run social learning opportunities, and really what this means is they are autism-friendly activities. So we will run a movie morning where the lights are up in the theater because often our people are afraid of the dark, and the volume is down. It's also an opportunity for our individuals who oftentimes can't sit still, need to get up and have a walk, or even run up and down the stairs, but they're still taking in the movie, to be out and seeing the same movies as everybody else. These are family events. We encourage brothers and sisters to come along because oftentimes when you have someone on the spectrum, mom and dad may go one way with the neurotypical child, and the mom will go the other way with the person with autism. So we like for the family to have an opportunity to come together. These are put in by families and or professionals who know of families who would be interested in attending social learning opportunities. This is our website, and I would highly encourage you to have a look at our website. As I said, we are a bilingual website. We have information that is absolutely evidence-based. You will see down the right-hand side all of the categories that we have. We have information for adults, as I said, information in French. We have our Abacus, which is the website that will help families find their ABA workers. We have camp listings. We have referral, which is our list of professionals that are available to yourself and to families. So I would encourage you when you get a chance to have a look. Abacus is really the only one that I'm going to highlight. We need to make sure that families know about Abacus because if they are looking for workers to have in their home who are skilled around managing behavior, this is the website we would encourage them to go to. When you go to the website, you'll scroll down, you'll see that there is a place for parents, but also for you as professionals. So it's a wealth of information that I would encourage you to have a look at another time. The only other thing I'm going to highlight on the website is our recorded webinars. There is a plethora of information on our VMO site. The most recent one was Toilet Training Without Tears. I think we did that one on June 22nd. So again, for probably many of the families that you are working with right now, this would be a great reference for them to have a look at, especially if they're working at toilet training their person with an autism spectrum disorder. So another poll. I'd love to know if you have accessed Autism Ontario in the past. Oh, nice. Wow, this is looking really good. I truly appreciate this. So 55% of you have not, and 45% of you have. So I can expect that that number probably will go up after today. But the most important thing is that you know it's there, and it is evidence-based. You're going to find really good information. So just another one. If you have used it in the past, what did you use it for? Did you use our website? Did you contact one of the family support workers? Was it through a social learning opportunity or something else that I'm not sure what that would be? Seeing some nice results here. So it's changing a little bit. Oh, it's changing a lot. Thanks for voting, everybody. Really appreciate it. Again, 63% of you, well, 55% of you through the website, 22 in person or on phone. 10% through social learning, and 10% is through other. Again, thanks. That's really important information for those of us that present webinars. So this is one of the videos that Louise referenced. The website is on the bottom of the slide there, but again, you can go onto our website and see it. I highly recommend that you have a look at it. It's something that you can use as parents and or professionals. If someone wants to know information on what is an autism spectrum disorder, this is an excellent resource. And it's only 8 minutes, which is the best part, and it has captions. So if you want to have the words and the visual there at the same time, you have that opportunity. The video tells us that an autism spectrum disorder is a lifelong neurological disorder. It affects 4 times more boys than girls, and 1% of the Canadian population has an autism spectrum disorder, which is currently 1 in 66. This video is very special. This is done by a comedian who is called Michael McCleary. And Michael just happens to have an autism spectrum disorder. He's also in here with his brother, which is so nice. So we would encourage you to have a look at it and hear what Michael has to say about autism spectrum disorders. This is another great resource if you have the time to have a look at Dr. Eric Cruchain's YouTube video. Dr. Cruchain teaches us that autism spectrum disorders, it's about the brain. The brain works very differently in people with autism spectrum disorders. What happens oftentimes is the pathways do not get as embedded as easily as the pathways in your brain and my brain do. So where it may take us 1 or 2 times to learn something, it takes many times for our individuals on the spectrum to learn something well enough so that pathway is embedded in the brain. What's very interesting information is if anyone has ever hung out Christmas lights, and in the middle of winter, you've got to take them down and it's freezing. And the last thing you want to do is be really organized because you're freezing. So you clump them all up into a ball. And then the next season you go to get them out and you have this mass of pathways. You can't find where the beginning is. You can't find where the end is. What's really interesting about that visual is we know that individuals on the spectrum's brains don't prune, which means they don't get rid of the pathways that they don't use. So there are many, many pathways in that brain. And sometimes when our individuals are expected to do something that we know they know what to do, you will ask them, say, to put on their coat, and they are unable to do so. Now, there can be several things going on at that time. They may have needed a visual. They may not have heard you say it. But the other thing is they may have heard you say it. It goes into the brain, and at that moment in time, it does not get on the right pathway. So the individual is not able to show you that they know how to put on their own coat. The brain also picks up some very specific information in the environment. Now, we're all going to look very funny. I'm going to ask you to do this. Take your piece of paper, and I want you to roll it up like a tube, like you did as a child. And I want you to look through that tube and see what you see. You see a very limited amount of information. This could be what's happening with individuals on the spectrum in their environment. So a good example of that could be the library. Sometimes when you take our children, youth, and adults into the library, they do not necessarily follow the library rules. And if you will just think about when they go into that room, they see a very small percentage of the clues that are available to tell you how to behave in the library. And that really helps us understand things like it may look like misbehavior, but it's really not misbehavior. It's misinformation to the brain. So really important to look around, see what the person may be missing, and try and provide them with the information they need so that they can be successful in any environment. I think some of you have heard this line. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, and that is so true. We know that cognitive levels in people with an autism spectrum disorder vary greatly. We have those who have superior intelligence, And then we have those who struggle cognitively significantly. We are individuals who have average to above average to superior intelligence. Does not really mean that their social, emotional abilities are at that level as well. So we need to be very conscious of trying to figure out socially and emotionally, where are our individuals? We know that the research tells us that our individuals can be 3 to 5 years behind their chronological age socially and emotionally. So if you have a 5-year-old and you're seeing what you would describe as 2-year-old behavior, you're probably right. It is 2-year-old behavior. So we have a fine line we need to walk. We need to treat our individuals in their age-appropriate way, but always keeping in mind that social emotional reaction may be different if they're not prepared for that experience. We really look at 3 main areas when we're talking about autism spectrum disorder: communication, social, and behavior. Now, this is not the diagnostic statistical manual specific. These are the 3 areas that those of us that work frontline that we really closely look at. Again, communication in autism spectrum disorders varies greatly. We have people who have very sophisticated language, and then we have people who don't speak at all. But we always have to keep in mind that just because you don't speak doesn't mean you don't communicate. Behavior is communication. Sounds are communication. Some of our individuals will take you to things that they want. Some of our individuals will climb on great big cupboards to show you what it is they want. Again, we hope that through learning how our individuals communicate that we can enhance what they're doing to make communication better. So we always have to be very careful when people have sophisticated language to check and make sure that they understand what the language is, what the words mean that they are using. Saying things like, so tell me about that. What does that word mean? Show me that. Can you explain that? Have you had that experience and tell me how it went? Because sometimes perspective is very different than the words that our people are able to use. Young communicators, like I think most of you are working with, we need to be very careful so that we don't shut down what communication they have. If we're lucky, our young communicators will take our hands and take us to the things that they want. In those very early days, we need to honor that communication. Please don't stop it, because if the children don't get what they're taking you to, they will stop using that mode of communication. And that take you to mode of communication is very, very powerful to use. So we need to make sure and try and encourage it whenever possible. Some of our individuals who don't use language learn to use things such as picture exchange communication systems. Now, this is a very specific communication system. This is not when you use the pictures to outline what we expect of our kids to do and our youth and adults to do throughout the day. This is an exchange of pictures to communicate what it is they need. Some of our individuals are using the iPad, and one of the programs they're using is Prolo to Go. But the most important part of this is the involvement of a speech and language pathologist. So if you don't have one at the Early On Center, really working with families and getting some consultations with a speech and language pathologist so that we can work with the current level of communication, create a level of communication, and or build on that level of communication. Because if we can communicate, our behavior goes down. When it comes to play, which is something that I know a lot of you are involved in, our individuals will often appear aloof. They may not look like they're participating in games, plays, songs, activities. But I know from my experience that we have individuals who will sit at a table and do a puzzle when circle is going on. It appears that they are not paying attention, and somewhere along the line, out comes something that says, wow, they were paying attention. We also know with our population that there's delayed processing, at least 10 seconds, some of our individuals longer. So if you think about all of the information that comes at you when you're sitting in circle and the rate at which it comes at you, our individuals will be processing some of that information, trying to let you know that they understood something of what you said. But so please don't assume that our individuals are not taking in what's going on around them. By the nature of being human, we all want to be social. Now, when it comes to teaching social skills and play skills, it is really important to try and teach some of those skills with an adult first. We are very, very predictable as adults so that we can present the play in a very systematic way that the children can learn to do that play. And the great example is running cars on the carpet and going vroom, vroom, wee, or whatever it is you're going to say, and doing that over and over and encouraging our children to do that. And once you start to see some of those play skills emerge, then you can start to encourage other kids to become part of that play, maybe by playing beside each other. Then the next step maybe being having our person with autism hand a car to that person who wants to join as a way of saying, come and play with me. Don't play with my car, but come and play with me. And once that goes well, then we can maybe think about doing some sharing of cars. Some of our kids do not want to share their favorite items, so again, be very careful of that. We don't want to start sharing with items that I love. To use some of the other items that may be the same, but they're not the ones that I love, because I will have a very hard time giving it up if you ask me to do that. So I'm really interested in understanding your understanding of what purpose behavior serves. Is it to get out of it a situation? Is it to get attention? Is it to access stuff? That's what tangibles mean. Is it for sensory reasons, or is it all of the above? Wow, that did not take long at all. So I see there's 15 people who've responded, and then 16, and the number's going up, and you say all of the above. So that tells me that you guys have a real understanding of behavior, and that makes my job so much easier. Oh, sorry, guys. You're absolutely right. But what's important for all of us to remember is that behavior happens for a reason. Behavior does not happen for no reason at all. Sometimes in the moment it seems like that, but sometimes when we do our research and we collect our data, we see that, oh my goodness, he didn't have breakfast this morning. He didn't want it. The family offered it, but he didn't want it. His mom brought him to school today rather than his dad. All of these things will happen which contribute to us understanding the function of behavior. Having been in the field for as long as I have, sensory has really impacted how we look at behavior as well. So we need to consider that. And my big point about this is we can't guess. Sometimes we guess right, but not often enough. We need to take some data and understand what happened before the behavior, what the behavior is we're looking at, and what happened after the behavior. I can share with you the Hard to Serve group home for adults that I worked in with for many years is a great example of us not understanding when our people that I were working with, like 55 years old, back in those days we didn't take any data and everybody guessed. And the reason that they are in Hard to Serve group home was we didn't understand function of behavior way back then, so we couldn't replace those behaviors with the right behavior so that our people wouldn't have to use their aggressive behavior or their lack of cooperation and all of those things that some of our adults do. So by taking data, it teaches us function, which allows us to teach a skill that replaces that skill that has the same amount of meaning as that skill that we don't want. So if someone has some aggression, we want to be able to teach them how to get the same thing that they want through another way. Many of us, not just those of us on the spectrum, have passions, have interests. So I do want to encourage you not to take those passions and interests away. Those are things that we need to find a way to incorporate into the lives of those of our children, our youth, and our adults on the spectrum. They very much serve a function, and usually it's a calming function. So we need to find a way to bring those topics of interest, those objects, into our individuals' lives, especially at a young age. I know with our children when I worked in a school board that the things that they would carry around sometimes got in other kids' ways, and it was, you know, why can't Johnny have that at circle? Well, the answer is Johnny doesn't need it to stay calm. But we would take note of that, and we would try to work very carefully and slowly with Johnny. Yes, he may have it in circle and maybe, you know, turning the wheels or rolling it on the floor initially, and then we'd work with Johnny to get him to put it beside him so he knows it's still there, and then we'd work with Johnny to put it on the table maybe close to circle, and we wouldn't change that until he was completely calm and could stay in circle, and then we'd get him to put it in his backpack at the back of the room so he knew it was there. We knew the function was to calm him, and then we could carry on the day without him needing to have his little car at circle. So please, they serve a function. Figure out a way to initially incorporate it and then figure out a way to be able to put that item somewhere so that our individuals can continue to be a part of whatever it is they're engaging in. So another poll. I'm interested to know which of the following are part of our sensory system. There's a few on there that we know of and that we certainly speak of regularly. The touch, taste, sight, smell, sound, vestibular, and proprioception. Again, congratulations to you guys. You guys have taken on this sensory piece and understand it and have incorporated it into how you work with individuals and just, I think, children and people on the spectrum, because we all have sensory needs. I have to share with you my example. I had the opportunity to go to Disney with my godson, who happens to have Asperger's syndrome, and he wanted me to come on rides. And I am not a ride person, not at all. So all the way through Disney he's saying to me, Liz, can you come on this ride? And we got to the teacups, and I said yes. Well, I'm not sure what possessed me that day to say yes to the teacup ride. Anyway, his godfather, Jim, and I got on the ride with him, and the ride starts, and I think right away, oh my goodness, I'm going to throw up. And not only am I going to throw up, it's going to hit Jeremy, and there's two things that freak him right out, used to freak him right out, not out now, he's 19, is blood and barf. So the whole time I'm doing that self-talk of, you're okay, it's going to end soon. It didn't end soon enough. It was the longest ride in my career on rides. Anyway, the ride stopped, and Jer got off, and Jim got off, and now it's my turn to get off, and I cannot stand up. I know exactly what's going on. My vestibular system got spun. It got over-aroused. It overrode every ability that I had to tell my body to stand up and walk. I had to have Jim come back and hold my hand so that I could stand up and walk, and the minute he let my hand go, I couldn't walk. He had to come back and get my hand and make me walk. So although all of the reactions to sensory may not be that significant, it really gave me a personal experience about how sensory does impact our lives. So some of our children are hyper aroused or hypo, which is under aroused. A sensory diet, which is not food related, it does include weighted blanket, activities, fidget toys, is often found helpful to get our individuals to their optimum learning level. The best way, and really the only way, to set up a sensory diet is with the work of an occupational therapist who understands sensory regulation and sensory diets. Sometimes people try some of these strategies, and sometimes they work, and again, it was a guess, you got lucky, but sometimes they don't work, and it can make things worse for our people on the spectrum. So when I think about my experience with an over-aroused vestibular system, I don't want us to ever over-arouse any of our people on the spectrum, because it is a very out of control, uncomfortable feeling. So please consult with an occupational therapist. So here's the one we're all interested in. What are the causes of autism? Well, the real answer is we're certainly doing lots of research to figure things out. There is no one example. There is no one reason. I'm terribly sorry. We certainly are looking at all of the genetic pieces, the chromosomes. There are big studies going on, hoping that, not that we're looking for a cure for autism, but hoping that we can understand through genetics that there are groupings of individuals on the spectrum who behave and present in a certain way. And by learning about those groupings of individuals, we can be better able to know how to approach and what to teach and how to teach individuals who have that very similar grouping of genetic makeups. Now, we do know that the research currently is telling us that the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine does not cause autism. There are many families that believe it does, and as a professional, I am never going to say to a family, well, you know, the research says. I think families sometimes need to have a reason, and if this is the reason, as long as it's not getting in the way of progress, of them working with their kids and reaching out for support, I am not going to take that away from them. This may be the only way they get out of bed in the morning is believing that the MMR caused their child's autism. So again, currently the research tells us that it does not cause autism. We are definitely looking at many of the environmental links, you know, when we think about the pockets of kids across the country. We look at the chemicals that are used in chemical-rich environments where they grow grapes. Is there a larger pocket of children, youth, and adults in that area? Looking at what we add to our foods. Does this affect autism or the genetic makeup of individuals so that autism does present itself? So really, do we know the causes at this point? No, we don't. But I certainly believe we're going to have a better understanding of causes of autism as we progress in the next few years. So I'm going to get into talking a little bit about kind of strategies. That was a really quick overview of autism spectrum disorders. So some what's next, I would really encourage you, yourself, and or getting the families that you work with connected to Autism Ontario. Sometimes as a professional, I find it easier when I'm meeting with families and they want to be connected to other organizations. I will say to them, do I have your permission to start an email to get you connected to the Early On Center, for example? And they will give me their permission, and I will write the email, including them in that email, so that connection happens. This just sometimes takes one thing off of the load of our families of all the calls and all the emails that they have to do in order to get their families connected to get help. One of the other things I'm really asking you to do is to make sure that all of your families are connected to the Ontario Autism Program in your area. Sadly enough, there are families who as of yet don't know about this program. This is the provincial program that is available to all people on the spectrum 18 years and under. So what the autism program does, it does many things, but we want the children on the list. Now, there are lists. The weights vary depending on where in the province that you live, but we need to get the kids' names on the list in order for the ministry to understand how many children there are, but also so they have a chance of their name coming up on the list. So the sooner the parents get their children's name on the list, the sooner they're going to get service. I would really encourage you as the professional, if you're helping our families get connected, to ask the families to note down somewhere the date they called and who they spoke to, so that they're going to call back in a couple of months and ask, so has there been any movement on the list? And we hope to hear that, yes, we see your child's name on the list, and yes, there has been movement on the list. So please, if I could get you to ask every family that you know who has a child with an autism spectrum disorder, are they on the autism program list? And if they say yes, I would ask you to please call and just confirm that you are on the list. We do not want to miss any children in Ontario. That would be so great if you could do that for us. So, excuse me. So some tips to help those with an autism spectrum disorder. Consistency, and this means you as the adult. We need to be as consistent and predictable as possible. Now, we will work on generalization once our children can follow our basic expectations in our environment. So if you can present your way using the same words or as close to the same words, using the same visuals as possible, it will make learning easier for our children and youth. Our kids are not great at flexibility, so you being consistent really helps a lot. Provide structure. Again, when the child walks in the door, what is the routine? Can we encourage as much as possible that that same routine is done every day, every time the child enters the classroom, to take off their coat, that they do the same, or we teach the same steps over and over and over again. We know that our individuals need clear language. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So if you can't follow up on what you're going to say, don't say it. We also want you to think about questions that you ask our children and youth and our adults. When we say things like, do you want to go outside? Be careful. You're giving a choice. You might get a no. When the question was that you, or the statement was that you want to say is, we are going outside. Let's get our coats on. So please mean what you say what you mean, and don't talk too much. As I said earlier, our individuals have that delayed processing. So if you are giving if you're giving several instructions at one time, our individuals may be trying to process the first instruction. And when you throw out the second instruction, they're going to start to try to process that instruction. And now here comes the third instruction. And by this point, you have a very frustrated person who's working very hard to try and do what you're asking them to do, but you keep asking them something different, and they keep trying to process something different. So ask your first instruction, which may be stand up, wait your 10 seconds or more to see if there is success. If there isn't, give a gentle prompt or a point to appear next to them. If our individual can do some imitation, which is tough for our kids, that may help. If not, you may need to take a hand and help our individuals to stand up. And so don't feel like you need to be pumping language into our individuals all the time. There are certainly times for that, but when it comes to making a request and getting a response, please keep that language as simple as possible. I miss visual support, which is the most important thing. This is a group of people, myself included in this group, who are visual, concrete learners. When I see it, then I understand it. It's very interesting. You see, every now and then I look over to what is my left. I actually have notes to my left. I'm not really reading them, but I rely on them just to make sure that I'm on track and giving you the information that I need to give you. So our population needs some kind of visual supports, and whether that's schedules, so picture symbols, and or for very young children, it may be the objects. So if the first thing when they walk into the classroom is they're expected to do, all of the things within their day may be lined up. They go and pick up the first thing, which is a carpet. They carry the carpet over to circle. And at circle, there's a square where they match their carpet. Then they sit down. When carpet time is over, they pick their carpet up, and there's an already established finished box. It can just be a cardboard box with finish. In goes the carpet. The next thing the kids do is they get to go to a center. We may have predetermined where it is they're going. We will have decided what their choices can be. So say that we know it's very successful if our individuals go to the water table first because they've sat for such a long time. So a water toy will be next. They'll pick up their water toy, we'll guide them initially, over to the water table. It will go in the water table, we'll play, we'll take it out, and it will go in the finish box, and then they'll go to the next thing. So that's for a very young learner where picture symbols, photographs, words wouldn't make a difference to them. So we try and use the real object. Rules are really important. The expectations, again, if you happen to have someone who can read at a very young age, which sometimes happens, this is hyperlexia, it doesn't always mean that they understand what is being read, so please make sure that rules are present in visual formats as well. Let's work really hard at reducing anxiety and not adding to it. So again, thinking about ourselves and how we even physically present ourselves. I've had the experience where, you know, when working, I will often wear my hair up. It's just one less thing for me to contend with throughout the day, but it's also one less thing for our children to be able to touch or grab. So I remember very specifically wearing my hair up all the time, especially when I was young in my career. And one day I arrived at work planning to put it up, and I didn't. And it was a very interesting response from one of our kids who could speak. He actually asked me who I was. So keeping those things in mind, our presentation is very interesting. My godson, Jer, in his very early days, he'd imitate his dad, and his dad would oftentimes shake people's hands. And after Jer shook someone's hand, he'd smell it, and which in the early days included mine. He'd shake my hand, and it was a weird experience for a 3-year-old because we didn't understand sensory as much as we do now, given that he's 19 years old, to shake my hand, and then he'd smell it. And that was his way in those early days as his brain was working so hard to identify me. Then he would know, oh, it's Liz. So be careful in how we present ourselves when it comes to reducing anxiety. And if we can at all alleviate those things in the environment that cause anxiety until we are able to teach a response so that our kids will not get anxiety. By exposing our kids without a proper approach to helping them understand that they are anxious, here's the things that they can do, will not make that anxiety goes away. I think many of you know when we have had a meltdown, a behavior meltdown, ourselves included, and or anxiety has taken control of us, it takes up to 7 hours for us to regulate again, so that all of our senses, so that our brain, we're all back together and we're able to deal with the environment. So we need to work hard in those early days at reducing anxiety and teaching skills to deal with anxiety. And next great one is, if you can, to rehearse expectations. If you are making a trip to the library, especially for the very first time, if you can get photographs and show the child what they are going to expect on the way to the library, or if the family can make a trip from wherever they are, if they're at the early on years, following the path that you will take to the library and practice it with them, we will all be much more successful when we have practiced things that we're going to learn in our new environment. We have to be supportive, and I have no doubt that all of you are absolutely supportive. I love the strategy of show me, so sticking out your hand and hoping that our children will take your hand. And if they don't, what I have often done is encourage them to take my hand and see if they will lead you, follow them to what it is they're trying to explain or tell you. Now, we can't do this in the middle of a meltdown. That doesn't work. There are other strategies that we need to use then. But if we can get it in those early times of sounds that our kids make, of behaviors that our kids make that may be trying to tell us, if we could get them to show us what it is they need, what it is they want, and if we can make that happen at that time, that will reduce any behavior that may get in the way of learning for the rest of the day. Again, for us, try and be as flexible as we can at that moment. I'm not saying let our kids away with everything. There is going to be behavior. Our children need to learn about themselves and learn about strategies from us, how to manage themselves. But if you're in a moment where being flexible is the best choice and our child gets away with whatever it was that was happening, be flexible. An example is, if you're crossing the road, you be as flexible as you need to be to get that child across the road safely. If that means picking them up and carrying them, that's what we do. Please focus on social communication with a speech and language pathologist. I cannot express how important that is. Communication is how we all manage our own behavior. And you know yourself, on the days that you're super tired, you haven't had enough food, and you're hangry, you know how your communication just leaves you, and you cannot express yourself, and your behavior deteriorates. So we need to very early on establish communication system with our students. Again, I've met so many children and youth across my career path that communication may not have been as much of a focus as it needs to be, and behaviors are still kind of managing the environments that they're living in. So please, speech and language pathologists, if you have to encourage the family to go to clinic days. Lots of organizations have clinic days to help manage behavior, and behavior is communication. Encourage families to go to clinic days and see if they can access a speech and language pathologist. Again, I'm sure that you run into lots of families who are concerned about their children. We don't say their children have autism, but we sure encourage that they visit a developmental pediatrician. If families want us to, we describe observable behaviors. We never say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we think your son or daughter has autism, but we do say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, your son or daughter is doing these things in class. We think it might be helpful if you took your child to a developmental pediatrician just to make sure that everything is okay. And then it's up to the families to be able to do this. We're moving along quite quickly because I was worried that we were going to run out of time, but this will give us lots of time for a question at the end. There are 10 things that I found very helpful to know from families of children on the autism spectrum, and I really wish that I could show you this video, but I have included the link. I would again encourage you to watch this. It is a very emotional experience when you watch it because there is music playing in the background, and I'm not going to give away what the song was. But please remember when speaking about our kids and our people that they are children and they are people first. They just happen to have autism. That's it. They just happen to have autism. So it is not, we don't say things like the autistic child in my class. We say the child with autism or the person with autism. Please remember, families want us to know that the sensory perceptions are very disordered. And the hard part for those of us as professionals is that disorderedness, if that's a word, can vary throughout the day. So you may have someone in the morning who is very hyper, who is very active. Their senses are running really, really quickly. And then at some point in the day, they will sit down and you think, are they ever going to move again? I think it's one of the hardest parts of understanding an autism spectrum disorder is the dysregulation, because then we have to change our behavior in order to meet the needs of the person on the spectrum. Please remember to distinguish between the won't, which is I choose not to, and the can't, I am not able to. Referencing back to understanding how the brain works. That messages go into the brain, and on a good day, they get to where they need to be, and the person is able to do that skill that you have seen them do over and over and over again. But days will come where you have been consistent, you will present it in the same way, and the person may look at you like you have never said that to them before in their life. Please think about that may be true. The information definitely went in, but we don't know where in the brain it went. It did not go to the place that enables them to be successful at what you ask them to do. Please remember, concrete thinker. When I see it, I understand it. So as professionals, I think you all know, we need to show it. That's how little kids learn. That you guys know all of that. But especially so when it comes to individuals on the spectrum. If you're leaving the classroom and you're the early on center room and you're going into the other room, which is the gym, please take an object that you can show the individual so that they can go, aha, I think I have an idea of where I'm going. Please remember that our individuals are very literal. When you say it's raining cats and dogs outside, please expect the possibility of our person standing up to go and see the cats and dogs that are raining outside. They are visual and concrete. They need to see it. They interpret language visually. Again, I have alluded to this, being very patient with our individuals who have limited vocabulary. So some words may be coming out, but they're not making sense. If you can ask a peer, what did he say? Sometimes that's a great help. I know with my two great nephews, the youngest one's 2 and the oldest one's 5, and sometimes the 2-year-old says something, I don't know what it is. I ask his brother, and his brother says, oh, he said this, and away we go. It all works very well. But also, if you're not able to do that, remember, see if you can encourage the person, the child, to take you to what it is they're trying to tell you. Again, it's back. I'm visually oriented. Show me. This is a big one. Please build on what I can do rather than what I cannot do. When you think about someone on the spectrum and they come to our world, which sometimes can be very different, they are in a position of constant learning, trying to be a part of circles, trying to be a part of play, trying to be a part of communication. Please remember that within a day, there has to be parts of those days where I, as a person on the spectrum, get to do things that I am good at. I cannot be learning all day long. So build into your schedules the things that you know the person that you are working with is really good at, and let them do it. So if you have someone who happens to be really good at stacking Lego, put it into the schedule and let them stack Lego for a limited amount of time. And yes, the transition away from the Lego is not going to be easy, but hopefully we have our schedules involved. Hopefully we're working on how to teach our children how to make those smooth transitions. But most importantly, it gives them a chance to be successful. Times in the day where they can do things that they are successful and not always feeling unsuccessful. Please help with social interactions. Again, you know, when you read some of the research tells that sometimes by an adult being a part of social interaction, it does limit peer-to-peer interaction. So we need to be very conscious of this. As I said earlier, when we're teaching social skills, we need to, or play skills, we need to be there, be consistent, teach those skills, and then work at generalizing them to the other kids so that the other kids can play with our person who happens to be on the spectrum. But given that some of our children need adult support, it's really important as an adult to be in the background as much as possible. So if a peer comes up and happens to say, "Can Johnny play with me?" we need to redirect that peer to say it to Johnny. And if Johnny can't answer, teach Johnny to wave or to do something that will indicate to the peer that yes, and if not, you can shake your head and say yes. So always trying to get the peer-to-peer interaction happening as much as possible for that person on the spectrum. This is the big one. It's the hard one. It's the one that involves the data, that everybody hates that word data, but we need it. Try to identify the triggers for the rough times in my day. And I said it all again, and I will say it again and again and again. If we don't understand the triggers, we won't understand the meltdowns. If we guess, I guess there's a 50% chance that we guessed right, but I'm not willing to risk the 50% that we guessed wrong. So we need to work hard at figuring out the triggers, taking data. The one thing I want to say about data is there is a big misconception that once you take data, you have to take it all day long, and that's a misconception. You, working with people or children in the early on centers, know the tough times in our kids' day. Focus on one of them. Pick the one time in the day that is terribly hard for the individual and take data on that one time. Now, if it happens 3 times a day, that same thing, take that data if you can. That will be very, very helpful. Over a week, we will begin to see patterns. You never need to take data, none of us can. We don't have enough hands. The best data is good data. And if good data means that you can take data for 15 minutes, one time a day, for a week, for 2 weeks, whatever it is you need to take so we begin to understand the function, that is fantastic. It is very, very helpful when you are trying to figure out functions that you work with someone who understands behavior. It can be tricky, and behavior can have a couple of functions, and that's where it gets really tricky. So see if you can understand, or if you can work with someone who has a behavioral background when you are doing that. And then the 10th one is, if you are a family member, please love me unconditionally, just as we should with all of us in the world. Unconditional love is very important. I always put a caution in here, and people sometimes think I'm mean, but I'm really not mean. Be very careful with how physical we are with our kids. I'm not saying don't hug our kids because they're little and they're under 6, most of them. But please remember, our kids do behaviors that they've been taught. So if we spend a lot of time hugging our kids, there's a really good chance our kids will think it's okay to hug everybody. And that's not a safe thing to teach people. So I don't want you not to hug our kids because we all need hugs. But please be careful. Some of our kids love to touch people's hair. Again, that's a calming thing. I get it. But again, we need to be very careful how much we let that happen, because we have adults out in the community going up to strange people and trying to touch their hair. And it doesn't usually end up good. So please love these kids unconditionally. Please enjoy the time you have with them. Please reach out to get as much help as you can. At Autism Ontario, we are absolutely here to help you as much as we can. That's the link for the video. So I just want to say thank you for giving us the time. And I know that Louise, are you there, wants to talk to you.
Yep, I'm still there.
Talk to us about the report card.
Yes, I'm happy to take over. And during that time, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, and that'll give Elizabeth a little bit of time to read them as I go through a couple of slides. I want to point out that about 3 weeks ago, the report card, the annual or biannual report card from Participation came out, and it indicates that yes, we all know physical activity is good for children's physical health, but in this report card they also emphasize how good it is for the mental health, the brain health, the cognition, the brain function, mental health, and especially for children who have neurodevelopmental disability, and Autism Spectrum Disorder is part of that. So I do encourage you to download that report card and promote that to the families you work with, how physical activity can be beneficial for their children. And I was actually part of the committee who developed that portion of the report card. And I think it was very interesting to bring in people from physical activity backgrounds and from neurodevelopmental disability background, and all working together and looking at the research. So I wanted to just highlight that. And I did put our little general promo about the Best Start Resource Center at the end. As you probably know, we provide information, coaching, resources, training to service providers in the areas of maternal health and early childhood development. We're a program of Health Nexus, and we're a designated bilingual organization, which implies that everything we do for the public we can offer in French and English according to the needs that are expressed. But all our resources are developed French and English for the public. And I just changed that slide. Yesterday, we're funded by the Ontario Ministry of Children and Social Services. It was the Ministry of Children and Youth Services, so I just quickly made the adjustment. Now, and I do want to make sure you make note of Elizabeth's contact information. If some of the questions are not answered through the chat box or it's more specific, please email her after. In the meantime, we are going to open up that chat box so that everybody can see the questions, and we'll see if anybody else has questions. So far, it's little slow. And in the meantime, I really want to say how much I've enjoyed this presentation, and it really shows that Elizabeth knows her stuff, and she has worked with children, and I would want her to be the caregiver of my child for sure, and who might be on, very, very good. You're very responsive to the needs. So if there are any questions, I'll give it another few seconds, and otherwise, I will be sending an email to all the registered participants with the recording link and also an evaluation link, and it's very important for us to get those evaluations back to get a sense if webinars are what you want, especially if you want more webinars. We have tried to make this one a little bit interactive, and I do know a couple of people texted us that they were having a little bit of problems with the visual or with the audio. Hopefully you'll get what you need through the recording, and I apologize. We try to test on a couple of platforms. Sometimes there might be a slow connection or something that makes it happen. Now, I don't see any questions, and you had left the whole 20 minutes for questions, Elizabeth. So I will say thank you very much, and I think we will wrap this call at this point. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, absolutely.